Welcome to Remix EQ Live, where we are amplifying equity with a remix of information, interviews, and inspiration. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Tate, and today I am broadcasting live from Savannah, Georgia, where I live. For those joining us today, please drop a greeting of choice in the comments. Let us know where you are joining from and the equity-driven work you do or aspire to do. And remember, Remix EQ Live is an experience that's meant to be shared. So I encourage you to hit the share button or the invite buttons and bring along your people, your network, your family, your friends, your peeps, and join our Remix EQ community today. This season, we are broadcasting live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, so we can now connect to you more broadly, growing our reach and building our learning community. And while those comments are flowing in and those invitations are flowing out, I want to remind you that Remix EQ Live offers us the opportunity to connect and build community with each other around the equity-driven work being performed throughout the world. And we do this by centering the work. That is, our guests and viewers share examples of what they do in their role or position as a way to illustrate the innovative, effective, and meaningful ways they advance equity in the spaces in which they live, work, or play. So, throughout the show and in the comments, I invite you to also share what you do to make the world a more just place. It is the second half of season 5 of Remix EQ Live. I got a whole season to rhyme, y'all. And we are back for another interview show. And in this episode, I am in conversation with Dr. Jillian Whatley, the Chief Executive Officer of Jillian Whatley and Associates, LLC, which specializes in providing training for educators, leaders, and organizations with a focus on enhancing culture and climate. And in today's show, you'll have the opportunity to listen and learn from Dr. Whatley as she discusses equity in education with a lens of implicit bias. Our conversation will focus on how to best serve Black and Brown children in schools. So let's begin this important conversation for change. Welcome, Dr. Jillian Whatley.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Tate. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy for you to be here. And I know everyone in the community is also. So, Dr. Whatley, to start us off, I just ask that you introduce yourself. And as you do, please share one or two career or personal twists and turns that have led to your current role.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be in the space. I am Dr. Whatley. I am an educator by trade, but also I'm a school psychologist by trade, and also I have a doctorate in leadership. So I kind of done 3 different types of careers over the lifespan. I started out as a teacher in a residential psychiatric facility, went on to be in an alternative school. And while I was in the alternative school, I was like, you know what? I like working with kids. Not in the classroom, maybe outside. So I went on to be a school psychologist, after which I was promoted into leadership over school psychologists and behavior programs in Atlanta Public Schools, went on to be the executive director of student support services in Clark County School District. And now I'm with Huffton Mifflin Harcourt as the director of professional learning. They're focused on special work around equity and culture and climate and anything that around curriculum development. I'm also still practicing as a psychologist. I still believe in the work that we do. And Eric, when you asked me that question about, the twists and turns, the things that happen in leadership or just in the work we do, what caused you to be in your current role? I was really pondering that because there were 2 significant things for me. One, I was in a very toxic work environment. As a woman of color in my previous role, and it caused me to pivot my career. And what I found is that some people have a challenge with sitting under the leadership of a woman of color. It is very prevalent and it happens. And I am of the mindset, I just don't have to deal with that. So that was one reason I pivoted in my career. Another is that I try to make sure my career parallels with my child. That is really important for me as a woman in leadership. I do not ever want to advocate for other children more than I advocate for my own child. So if anything ever impacts my ability to show up for my child, I quickly reassess. So those have been the two critical things in my past that really caused me to like maybe take a leadership role or maybe leave a leadership role, either one of those. So those are really crucial moments in my life and in my career.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate both, like you telling us your role and the experiences that you had as a school psychologist, but also sharing about your work experiences and how that influence your shifts, and knowing that
Yeah.
you want to be respected and treated well in your position, whatever it is. And that is like a
Yes.
criteria for your work. And I think that's important. And then the other part is really great. Like you said, you parallel your career with your child. And I think that's really important. On the show, we always ask about twists and turns just to showcase different career pathways and normalize those, but also that to let people know that, you know, we are people and full people, and there's
Absolutely.
other things that are happening in our lives, and those things also influence our career choices and the way we serve our community.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that is super cool about just knowing your purpose.
Yes.
Once you know your purpose, your decisions should align with that. And you have to be unapologetic about it. So yes, I am all for it.
Yes, well, I love it. Well, thank you for that introduction. We have Brianna Matchett is here. She says, hello, welcome, Dr. Jillian Whatley. I don't know if she says it in that voice, but today she did.
I know you did it. You did it. You did it.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you for that introduction. And definitely those in our community, connect with Dr. Jillian Whatley in the comments during this episode. We're excited to have you. And for those who are just joining us, this is Remix EQ Live. We're amplifying equity through a remix of information, interviews, and inspiration. And now that you've had the chance to meet and reconnect with Dr. Jillian Whatley, I hope and I know that you are inviting others to tune in. And of course, I invite you to interact with us. So please post comments, say hello, ask questions, share examples and learnings as we dive into this interview. You are part of our Remix EQ Live experience. So now we center the work. This is an opportunity for us to learn from Dr. Jillian Whatley about how she works with education leaders to make the world a more just place. And Dr. Whatley, I know from our conversations that you apply an implicit bias lens to your work. And on this show, we really work to develop a shared understanding of the different perspectives and lenses related to equity and justice. So before we go deeper into conversation, will you define implicit bias for us and also share an example that illustrates how implicit bias can affect K through 12 education leaders' decision making?
Oh, wow, that's so important. So implicit bias is an unconscious association, belief, or even an attitude towards any social group. And those social groups can be women, children of color, men, the LGBTQIA community, any social group. And sometimes where these implicit biases come from is from the exposure or the lack of exposure to something, to a social group. And when I say exposure, like deep exposure, not just, you can still have biases about people in poverty, even though you donate to a fund or an organization that helps folks in poverty, because you've never directly engaged with them to really understand the lived experience of it. Some ways that implicit bias shows up in education. One way is through inequitable discipline practices. Another is through curricular bias, teacher traits, how we select teachers, how we assign teachers to certain groups of students, and how we assign students to certain groups of teachers. Also, bias shows up through the special education process when we are determining whether or not a student is eligible for special education services or not. It would be my research through my dissertation was very clear that people really rely on words it's amazing to really determine whether or not a student needs special education services. So some of the words that would come up is inattentive, quiet. I cannot believe the word quiet could get you into a referral because the teacher may think that you don't talk a lot. And while, yes, there may be challenges with students who don't talk a lot, we want to make sure that we're not just referring quiet children for special education services. And so those are some ways that it shows up in education. Also, it relates to leadership, like the leadership pipeline. You know, whether or not your leadership pipeline in school systems is diverse, not only diverse in race, not only diverse in gender, but also diverse in thought. You know, we don't want all people that think the same. We want neurodivergent people at the table because they would be the best advocates for folks and students who are neurodiverse. And so those are ways that, you know, we see the inequities that may play out or the biases that may play out in education.
All right. Thank you so much for that definition and for the many examples. I know that we're going to dive into a couple of those examples later, but I do think that it helps our community understand, one, what implicit bias is, but also the many different ways that it can play out in our education system from classroom all the way up to leadership. So now I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your role. So in your role as Chief Executive Officer of Jillian Whatley and Associates, LLC, I just like to say the whole thing. How do you cultivate a positive and inclusive environment within educational institutions?
Yeah, and let me just center it on the reason Jillian Whatley and Associates was founded is for that very reason, right? Like I was experiencing, watching, a part of, and helping develop programs to help with equity, even though we didn't say equity, right? Because you can be a part of equity in many ways. The ways I listed before, through special ed, through discipline, through gifted programming, all of these things, making fairness happen in education through these different windows and more. And so what I would notice is that within the school system, we have a lot of things, a lot of programs, but a lot of those programs do not really work on the people. It works on what you can do for the organization. It's not necessarily changing your mindset about you and how you show up in the classroom, how you show up as a leader, your own stuff that you bring. So at Jillian Whatley and Associates, really, we're working with leaders, we're working with teachers, we're working with, oh my God, someone just called me to come work with her police staff around the work, like changing how you think about people, working with you on psychological safety. How do you create psychologically safe classrooms? Well, that starts with you. So if you as a teacher are, have some unresolved trauma, you have some unresolved stuff that sits with you, no matter what curriculum they put in place, no matter what they give, the tool they give you, until you change as a human vessel, that will never, it won't work. So we really go in and work with like these leaders or these people who work with children or work with the community on things such as like emotional intelligence, implicit bias. I've developed an entire curriculum where we really pull those things out and do a lot of reflective work to change people's behaviors that are counter to working with children, families, and communities.
Oh, I think that's great. You're really giving us insight into like the role of an individual and the work that they must put in, right? To, like, as you say, show up in these classrooms to be able to implement any of the strategies or policies that are in place to bring about more equitable outcomes in institutions. And so, yeah, I love it. And I love the range of people that you work with. So you have like teachers, you have leaders, and you have our police officers.
Yes. Yeah, I've worked with, oh my God, like you said, teachers, police officers, mental health professionals. Yes. Also worked with corporate spaces, and now I'm going to be working with some police officers, which I think is real critical because we see the effects of when bias shows up in the work they do. Yes. And kudos to this chief of police who is partnering with me on that work. Yeah. In South Carolina.
And kudos to you for doing this work. So I appreciate it. They're in good hands. Well, thank you. So the Remix EQ community is always ready to add examples and strategies and tools to our repertoire as we work to make the world a more just place. So this helps us to connect to and visualize the important work that you do. And it also enables us to learn from and with you about the experiences of the people and places you serve. So
Yes.
Will you share another example that showcases how implicit bias influences education leaders' decision-making and strategies that were implemented to mitigate the impact of bias on students?
Yeah, I think I have a couple of them, like when I was reading through the questions and thinking through that. And one thing is we have to really work on the teacher-student interaction more. The relationship between a teacher and a student, and not just the relationship between students who look like you. Because what happens is that I make some assumptions about Tyrone, who's from this side of the tracks, that I don't make about Sally, who's from those sides of the track, and they did the same thing. And I saw that very clearly in the districts I work with. How students get punished or penalized or consequence sometimes draws down to race and gender. And as a person who supervised discipline, I had to confront that head on with administrators and leaders, because you can say you don't do it, but then when we look at the data, we're disproportionate with race and gender. So we can say all day we ain't doing it, and so the implicit bias can influence like the quality and the nature of those interactions between the adults in the school building and the children. So some things that what I've noticed is that certain groups of children would be offered less praise, less feedback, less encouragement, right? It's almost like a zero tolerance policy for certain groups of children. So what do we do about that? I offer that we need to one, we got to call it out. You know, I'm big on calling a thing a thing. What we're not going to do is say it doesn't exist, but the data says something is funky here. Like your data saying that it's disproportionate. You're not disproportionate because somebody woke up one day and said, dang, this school district is going to be disproportionate. There are behaviors that are maintaining essentially a caste system within education. And those behaviors are coming from adults. So things that you can put in place is really having trainings like implicit bias, also establishing accountability measures for leaders and for teachers. What I will say is that a lot of new teachers coming into the field need a lot of help and coaching around just building relationships with children, and with children, I will also say, who do not look like them. I think we make assumptions that all teachers are the same and that they just love all children. Let me tell you, I was so saddened one time, and I'll tell the story years ago. I was evaluating a student. He said to me, Dr. Whatley, my teacher doesn't like me. And I was like, no, that can't. First of all, I come from a family of educators, and if through my lens, that was just impossible. You understand what I'm saying, Dr. Tate? I could never imagine a teacher that did not like a kid. Well, I said in an interview with a teacher, and I said, you know, I just want to let you know that the student thinks that you don't like him. And I know before I could even get it out, she was like, oh, I don't like him. What? How could you not like a kid? Like, I don't even understand. Like, it wasn't computing. And so some of those things need to be kind of addressed through coaching teachers on, you know, we do a great job at coaching teachers on instruction and curriculum. We even have titles such as instructional coaches. I mean, you go and pull it up, you will see it. But rarely do teachers and leaders get coached on how to develop relationships with children and people. And so I would offer that that's something that, you know, I think is a strategy that I've offered to many schools, is for student support services folks to really go in and help, you know, teachers, leaders around relationship types of things.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So it made me think, so like training, you talked about that and being able to like understand that you hold a bias, and naming that and being able to put that in
Oh,
place.
absolutely.
And then you also talked about accountability measures for both teachers and leaders. So what are some examples of accountability measures that you would have with regard to discipline or even special education or other aspects of education or schools?
It all starts with policy. You can say a thing, but grounding it in your school board policy. When I was in my former district, when we did the discipline framework, we started with policy. We didn't start with staff. We didn't start with anything else. We grounded it in the expectations in this school is this per board policy. Okay. Then after that, developing SOPs of how this is going to look in said schools. After then, if certain schools needed personnel that help with certain things, like some folks in some schools have culture and climate specialists, some schools have deans of discipline, then making sure that that personnel has an understanding of what their job responsibilities are. And then also professional learning, which is critical to the work. Professional learning needs to be ongoing, embedded, and with an expectation of changing behaviors, not just professional learning just to have it. We've got to get away from just checking things off of a list and not having the expectation that behaviors are going to change for adults. So that means that professional learning needs to look a little different for adults with an also embedded accountability measures for behavior change to occur.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for these strategies. I think that it's really important to hear like specific ways that school boards and the leaders can address bias and move toward or drive toward like more equitable decision making within their schools.
Yeah.
I talked with you a little bit before, and we had a conversation about special education and that review process, and you talked about
Yeah.
a multi-disciplinary team and decision making, and I think that would be a really great example to share with our guest about a very specific strategy to address bias. Could you bring that up and share that with us?
Yeah, I did. In my research, what we found was that so historically, the multidisciplinary team is really put together to mitigate bias. Back in the day, folks could come in and say, Erica, you got a disability. And that's that one person's opinion of you, which we know one person's opinion of anything can be challenged in a court of law. And so the problem solving team back in the 80s was really constructed with the notion that if we bring a team of people together, we can mitigate some of that bias. And then thus we make it a team decision in terms of what needs to happen for a child, coming from the lens of multiple people in the schools. So who sits on the multidisciplinary team? Teachers, both general and special ed when deemed necessary, but the general education teacher has to be there. Then we have school psychologists, school counselors, speech pathologists, occupational, anyone that if you present with a challenge or concern needs to be present at that team. So what I found was if we have this team that is supposed to come together to be able to mitigate the bias and be essentially objective in their recommendations, because that's what the literature says, then my question to people, myself included, is why are we still seeing so many children being disproportionately disciplined, disproportionately placed in special education, particularly in certain categories? Because a lot of children of color are being placed in certain categories. Just let y'all know, EBD is one of them. So then we need to go back to what's happening in that multiple disciplinary team. So my suggestion would be to not only work with that multidisciplinary team around policies and procedures and how the work is supposed to be done, but also working with them on their bias. on the team. Because if we go back to the literature says, right, Dr. Tate, this is why that team was put together. But there's two different things when we talk about processes in schools. We can talk about the technical part, which is the policy, the procedure, but the adaptive part is the people. Yeah. So the people part is like, you're going to follow the rules, but you might add your own jazz to it, depending on your mood, your bias, how you see things. You may change that way things supposed to go because the people part has not really been addressed. So I would, what I came away with in my research is knowing that we've got to do the both and. We've got to, yes, have policy, procedures, and SOPs. Wonderful, great, keep doing that. Then you got to have the adaptive piece, working with how people think, process, how they make decisions. Those things are just as critical. So those both things working together, I've used in districts that really help move the needle. And when I was in Atlanta Public Schools, one of my roles was tasked with bringing us out of disproportionality, Dr. Tate. Well, you just don't bring a district out of disproportionality by saying, come on out of disproportionality. Well, you got to be intentional around both and policies and procedures, but also working with the mindsets of leaders and teachers. And that proved to be really good for my team there at that time.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing your school psychologist perspective to this because you are also focused on the mindset and behaviors of a person. And I think that in work and education and even like in public health, like fields I've been a part of, probably about a decade ago, there were all these shifts to moving toward, we're going to only fund policy oriented work or systems change oriented work, which we know is important given like the history of policy making an impact on our country. But also, even if you have a policy in place and you have people in place to implement it or monitor it, how they understand the policy, how they understand their role in relation to the community or the people they serve is so important. And it just doesn't get done just by putting it on the books, like you said. So I'm so glad you kept elaborating. Because it's really important that both are worked on because institutions are people.
That's right. So, right. And even on our best days, we make mistakes.
Absolutely.
But what we don't want to do is keep making mistakes that cause children to be further put in the underclass of American society. That's when we got a problem with Dr. Whatley. You're like, wait a minute now.
That's right. And me too.
I know.
Many people in this community. So, well, you have made really bold moves toward ensuring that our school systems and other spaces are fair, are inclusive, and are supportive of children. What advice do you have for education leaders who seek to transform their good intentions into impactful actions?
Wow. Well, I think I want to go back a little bit because I think actions would look very different based on a couple of things. One thing that I see that I'm working with districts on too is whose voice do you hear the most and whose voice don't you hear, and what communication channels are you making it such that all voices are heard? So I'd say I get it. For example, when we talk about community engagement, I just did a talk to 700 international teachers the other week. And they were like, Dr. Whatley, what are some innovative things we can do about community engagement? Well, here's some innovation. Go into the community. Okay? Because traditionally in school systems, we expect parents to come to us. What an elitist way to think, educators. We don't go into the neighborhoods and set up workshops at your local, the local place where people may work. We found that to be really helpful in my last district, doing the trainings on site where they work, during their lunch, going into the community and talking to people. That way you're breaking down the barrier. Because for me as a parent, it is very easy sometimes to get to a coffee chat during the day. I work from home. I have a vehicle. I don't live far from my daughter's school. In fact, I sit on the leadership team at my daughter's school. That's Dr. Whatley's lens. That's not everyone's lens whose student shows up in your school. So now we're talking about barriers for parents to even be able to engage in a said school. So what do we do, leaders? What do we do, folks? Go to them. That is something that has been a game changer in some districts and even in my previous district as well.
Yeah, I love it.
So I would say, what is my advice? Gosh, and I was thinking about this, Dr. Tate, when I saw your questions. I think that people, and this is the people piece of me, right? You got to commit to equity in your heart and know your why. Otherwise, you are hurting marginalized groups even more by being very performative in your actions. That goes for organizations, that goes for people. I'm very clear on my why. I show up and I talk about my why. That's just who I am. I'm clear, right? So nobody's gonna come and be like, that's not your why. This is my why. I know it's been my why since I was a child. I didn't have to go to school for this. I was born and bred to do this work. I'm very clear on that. Where I think that some systems mess up is that you have the wrong people doing the work because it's not in their heart. And I will say this, and this may step on people's toes, and I'm okay with that because I think sometimes we need to step on toes. Getting a certification in DEI and equity does not make it mean that you, does not necessarily mean that it's in your heart. Now, could it add more credentials to your resume? Does it give you a little bit more leveraging power? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that it's in your heart. Same goal for me. Getting a PhD in leadership doesn't mean leadership is my heart, just adds to my resume. It's in my heart. So you can always quickly tell when you get in spaces, when people are doing things very performatively and when people are really meaning it and they're in it and they want this work to occur. The second thing would be to create a real plan. And the real plan doesn't rest with just one person. If you have within your organization a DEI coordinator or a chief equity officer, whatever titles we throw around, that one person is not enough to do the work of equity. It is the responsibility of everyone in that organization, from the rooter to the tutor, to partner with that person. It is not that one person's responsibility. And then I would also encourage to sustain that plan. It should not stop with just one administration and then drop off. Let me just say this. We know where the disenfranchised children are in our school districts. We knew that before COVID. So when people say, COVID happened and we figured out this, that's a shame on you as a leader that COVID had to happen for you to see something. Amen. That means that we as an institution of education, we must have blinders on if we did not know where those hot spots were, where children did not have technology access, where children were food insecure, where children were housing insecure. Shame on us if COVID happened and we didn't have a pulse on that already. So now, here we are post-COVID, and another pandemic will come one day. So what are you doing right now to make sure that things are equitable and fair? So if things change in our society, that certain children do not go missing, Dr. Tate, because we still have not found all children during COVID, that folks are still getting adequate housing, that children are not food insecure. This is the real work. It should not be performative and just time bound, right? During COVID, we are all hands on deck. And then when things return back to the pseudo normal, now it's left to a few of us who are still boots on the ground. That's not the way this thing works.
Well, I thank you for that advice. I appreciate you stepping on toes and slapping hands. I think that's important for the work, but also I just want to bring forward is this idea that it being in your heart. And I know that we have one of our comments from one of our viewers is like, facts, commitment to equity in your heart. I love it when I can say things like that, facts. Right. And I agree with you, like having it in your heart, but also from your heart, there's a plan that is shared by everyone in the organization.
That's right.
Not just that person. I just wanted to make sure that came as, and just reiterate it. You said it great, but, you know, it is not the responsibility of those who are disenfranchised or those who are connected to those groups to make this world more equitable and to seek more justice. Everybody has to play a part. It has to be a plan, and that plan has to continue on even if you're not there. And so I thank you for that advice, and I hope that our leaders, both in education and other organizations, take it to heart. And so before we go, for those who tune into Remix EQ Live on a regular basis, you know that our learning community celebrates with each other, and we definitely celebrate the works of our guests. That is what they produce for others: books, talks, online content, all the things. And Dr. Whatley, you have written a children's book, Where is My Teacher?
Okay. I know. I didn't know you had it, Erica.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So hold up. So, Where is My Teacher? A story for children who have lost their teacher. So, just quickly, could you share with us why you wrote this book and who should read it?
Oh, so years ago, my daughter in kindergarten, she had a teacher that she loved. I mean, we love Miss Wilma. The community loved her, and she suddenly was taken away from us. Still grieving that because it was a very sudden loss, and particularly for children. And after years, Dr. Tate working on crisis teams and things like that, and being a psychologist, nothing really can prepare you for that. And I had to go through my own journey with how am I going to have the words to tell my teacher, my daughter, that her teacher, somebody she so admired, is now gone, literally going into the doctor to have a procedure and never woke up. So the kids were anticipating her to come back. It was just supposed to be an outpatient thing. Nonetheless, what I experienced during that time was the community. The community came together, meaning, and what I will say is that therapists were on site at the school. The counselors pushed into the classrooms with the kids every day. They already had a restorative circle set up as a part of their way of just dealing with classroom good and bad things. So they push therapeutic circles into that already circle for those kids. My daughter ended up going to play therapy because we noticed some signs and, that were not really like you would expect it to be for an adult. It's like more for kids. Like we just noticed like the nail biting, that she never was a nail biter. She became a nail biter. And so I decided to take her to a play therapist. So the purpose for this book is during that time, it was hard for me to find a book that really honored the relationship. And I'll go back to what I said earlier between a teacher and a student. It is not like another one. It has its own thing. And I honor that. And this book centers on just the teacher. It's a conversation starter. I'm building right now with my team other types of questions that parents can use to accompany the book that gives you the words. And that comes from a very personal place, Dr. Tate, because there was no training in the world that could teach me how to tell my daughter that. I couldn't even get the words out. I didn't know what to say. And I've been through training, had delivered bad news to kids and people, but now it's personal, right? And I was like, okay, I'm stuck. So my hope is that this gives parents the words that you may not have, but it gives you something physical you can hold on to show that Lisi is well. Lisi will be well. She will continue to be well. And your child will be well. And you will be well. I understand the loss of words. So hopefully I'm giving you those in this book. And the next step is to also accompany that with questions that can help guide parents for when you just don't have the words. You can go to a book and say, well, let's do this together. And that's been the healing process for my daughter, as for me, and countless other families that were impacted by the loss of Wilma.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and we appreciate it. I think it's a testament to your advocacy that you have a situation that affected you personally and that you're creating resources for others to support those who have similar situations. So, for those who are out there, buy Dr. Jillian Whatley's children's book, Where's My Teacher? A story for children who lost their teacher. Amplify her works.
Let's do it. Thank you so much, Dr. Tate.
Thank you. So, as our Remix EQ community knows, each episode, guests like Dr. Jillian Whatley, they drop knowledge, they drop inspiration on us so that we can continue to work to make the world a more just place. And Dr. Jillian Whatley, you have done just that by sharing your career and your personal twists and turns that have led you to advocate for Black and brown children in schools, even though you know and you have told us that you were born and bred to do this work. You continue to do this work, and we appreciate your experiences. We appreciate all the examples that you shared with us, that you added to this conversation, and of course the impact that you are making on education and on both the mindsets and the behaviors of individuals within our system and also the system's change. And so as we close out this show, I'd love for you to drop just one 30-second gem of inspiration to remind us why you continue to be such a fierce advocate for children.
Wow. I really believe, Dr. Tate, every child deserves access and quality education, regardless of their background or socioeconomic status or identities or even their ability levels. Advocating for children in public education and public schools ensures that educational opportunities are equitable and inclusive for all students. This is the next generation, and I'm so committed to this work.
Yes, well, thank you. And the next generation will benefit from that commitment. So I appreciate you, Dr. Jillian Whatley, for accepting my invitation to speak about what matters most to you, creating positive and inclusive spaces for children and within education. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to listen and learn from you today, especially about why you've chosen to make the world a more just place. And just a reminder, I will return next month on the second and fourth Friday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern for more Remix EQ Live episodes. On April 12th, we're listening and learning about food justice from Sagdrina Brown-Jalal, founder and lead facilitator of Saged Consulting. And on April 26th, we're being informed and inspired by Dr. Leslie Ann Knoll, an assistant professor at North Carolina State University in the Department of Media Arts, Design, Technology, College of Design. She is the author of Design Social Change, Take Action, Work Toward Equity, and Challenge the Status Quo. So tune in on LinkedIn and YouTube, and also like and share our upcoming and past episodes. Watch your feed and check your inbox, and visit the Remix EQ Live webpage for episode announcements, recordings, and more information about our inspiring guests. And in the meantime, I invite you to view my recent TEDx talk entitled Building Community to Make the World a More Just Place. My talk was inspired by Remix EQ Live and was an opportunity to pause and reflect on the learning and inspiration I received from interviewing guests and interacting with you, our viewers, our social justice warriors. So please watch, react, leave comments, engage in dialogue with each other, and share it with your personal and professional communities. And while you're there, please discover new ways to support the Remix EQ community, such as donation, or what I am now referring to as a love offering, which makes it possible to plan, promote, produce each of these episodes that you listen and learn from. So if you feel informed and inspired after today's episode, show your appreciation with some coins. And you can also purchase merch, such as our Amplify and Empower notebooks, as well as message teas that we have on the site. Browse the Blue Knowledge store. It's a retail therapy for social justice warriors. And while you're there on the show's webpage and you are engaging in a bit of justice inspired retail therapy, please poke around on the website and learn more about my business, Blue Knowledge, which advances equity in schools and communities through collaborative research, inclusive evaluation, and equity-driven professional learning. You can follow us on LinkedIn, the Blue Knowledge YouTube channel, as well as subscribe to our newsletter. And of course, I invite you to connect with me here in these digital streets. Thank you, Remix E community, for your engagement, your encouragement, and of course, your rally, which is how we recognize, appreciate, learn, love, and take care of you as you work to make the world a more just place. I'm your host, Dr. Erica Tate, and this is Remix CQ Live. See you next time.